Well, anyway, thank you for agreeing to meet with me today. It's
Happy to
it's
do
a
it.
real
Yeah.
pleasure, real honor to meet you. I guess I would like to start this interview basically talking about the economic crisis and how we as workers and as lobbyists can deal with the issues which we face. I recently read your piece, Crisis and Hope, which was published in the Boston Review. And in that piece, you stated that the financial crisis will presumably be patched up somehow while leaving the institutions that created it pretty much in place. While thinking about this, I came to understand that working people in the US and North America and in Europe basically are not really being helped by the bailout so much.
No. They're being helped by the stimulus, but the stimulus and the bailout are two different things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And not enough by this. The stimulus is much too small. It should be much larger.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they're, 10 million unemployed. But the policies are not made to reduce unemployment. They're made to help banks.
Mm-hmm. Right. And following on that, there has been a recent upsurge of, I would say, a militant industrial action in workplaces, primarily throughout Europe, also North America.
A few in North America.
As you know, the Republic Windows and Doors factory in Chicago, that was the first factory occupation, I believe, since the 1930s in the U.S.
Maybe. No, not quite, because the Youngstown Steel, it was an occupation in 1979, I think. Mm-hmm. And actually, I think I mentioned that in the article. It's a model that really should be pursued now. They went on to try to have the workforce and the community take over the abandoned factories that U.S. Steel was dismantling. Mm-hmm. And that effort was led pretty much, the legal effort that followed was led by Staughton Lynd, who's a radical labor lawyer. And it went into the courts, and they didn't win in the courts, but they could have won. And if they could have won, it would have been with enough support, which they didn't have. It could have meant a lot. In fact, the same thing could be done right now. At Republic Windows, the corporation saw what was coming and sold it off, which is pretty normal. But it ought to be done right now in the auto industry, for example. There's no reason why, other than weakness and lack of kind of conception of how to proceed. There's no other reason why the workforce and the communities in, say, Detroit and Flint and so on can't take over these installations that General Motors is dismantling or selling off, and convert them. Take some assistance, but nothing like what the bailout of the banks. Convert them to, say, producing high-speed rail. Instead, what's happening, I may have mentioned that in the article, I don't recall, is that the Obama administration is using federal stimulus money to try to get Spain and France to produce high-speed rail for the United States, which badly needs it, but not the installations that are being dismantled. Presumably those policies are more profitable for the banks and other financial institutions. But that's a perfect opportunity for the workforce and the communities to simply proceed to do what they were trying to do in Youngstown and a little bit in Republic, and that is take over the factories, put them under worker self-management, produce what the country needs, badly needs, like high-speed rail, for example, or green technology, and so on.
I feel that a lot of these occupations and a lot of what workers are doing are a sort of an immediate response to the mass layoffs and to the decreased wages and hours. But I feel that a lot of what they're doing are they're sort of aiming for these these parochial gains without thinking more long term in terms of how they can move towards worker self-management.
Yeah, that's what the IWW should be doing, providing that spark. You're right, it's reactive. But the same was true of the sit-down strikes in the 30s. I mean, the reason the sit-down strikes struck such fear in the hearts of management was that they know that a sit-down strike is just one step short of taking over the factory and running it, and that's the end.
So you said the IWW could provide that spark. I feel that at the moment we're gaining numbers and we're gaining a lot of strength and power, but I feel that we're very much lacking a certain level of seriousness as in terms of how the rest of, at least in the U.S., how the rest of the labor movement is viewing us. And I feel it is a very difficult feat to go from being what we're doing now to really being a part of this broader labor movement in the U.S.
Well, you know, the U.S. is different from Europe and other countries in this, other industrial countries in this respect. Not Japan, but many. It has the U.S. is to a very unusual extent a business-run society. There are all kind of reasons for that, you know. No feudal background. Institutions remained in place in Europe. They didn't remain in place here. They were wiped out. There's a lot of reasons. But the fact of the matter is the U.S. is run by an unusually class-conscious and dedicated business class. It has a very violent labor history, much worse than Europe. Goes pretty far. You know, the attack on unions has been far more extreme here and much more successful. There's also the business propaganda has been far more successful. So anti-union propaganda has been considerably more successful here than in Europe, even among working people who would benefit by unions. And those are all things that, in fact, a rather striking aspect of business propaganda in the United States is the demonization of government, starting after the Second World War, after the Second World War ended with radicalization of the population in the United States and everywhere else, and calls for more popular takeover, government intervention, worker takeover of factories, all kinds of things. And business initiated a tremendous propaganda offensive. It's been pretty well studied, but the scale it surprised me when I read the scholarship. It's enormous. And it's been very effective. There are two major targets. One is unions, and the other is democracy. Democracy means getting people to regard government as an alien force that's robbing them and oppressing them, not as their government. In a democracy, it would be your government. So in a democracy, on, say, the day when you pay April 15th, it would be a day of celebration because you're getting together to provide resources for the programs that you decided on. In the United States, it's a day of mourning because this alien force is coming to rob you of your hard-earned money, the alien force being the government. Well, that's the general attitude, and it's a tremendous victory for the opponents of democracy. And, of course, any privileged sector is going to hate democracy. So they won that one. And they've won in a lot of respects. You can see it in the healthcare debate. They have managed to instill the idea that in fact, you take a look at the recent polls, the majority of the population thinks that if the government runs health care, they're going to take away your freedom because that's that alien force again that steals your taxes. At the same time, the public favors a national health care program. The contradiction is somehow unresolved. And in the case of the business propaganda, it's particularly ironic because while they want the population to hate the government, they want the population to love the government. Namely, they are in favor of a very powerful state which works in their interest. So you got to love that government, but hate the government that might work in your interest and you might control. And that's an interesting propaganda task, but it's been carried off very well. You can see it in the worship of Reagan. Worship is the right word. It's the kind of worship you don't find outside North Korea, let's say. The worship of Reagan portrays him as somebody who saved us from government, from oppression and so on. Actually, he was an apostle of big government. Government grew under Reagan. He was the most strongest opponent of free markets in post-war history among presidents. But that doesn't matter. They concocted an image that you worship. It doesn't matter what the reality is. I mean, North Korea, probably most of the population believes the propaganda about the dear leader and so on. It's hard to achieve that, especially in a free society, but it's been done. And that's the kind of thing that activists, IWW, have to work against right on the shop floor. It's not so simple, but it's been done before.
You mentioned that that the businesses are very class conscious. Can you elaborate on that statement a little more?
All you have to do is read the business literature. Mm-hmm. Like in the 1930s, they were very frightened, and they were concerned about the hazard to industrialists in the rising power of the masses. Straight Marxist rhetoric, just values changed. And it's constantly like that. They're constantly talking about the masses, the dangers they pose, how we have to control them, and it's a very, they understand what they're doing, and they're very class conscious. They press policies which work for their interests. I mean, for example, the insurance industries and the big banks are absolutely euphoric now because they have, on the business pages, they don't even conceal it, because they've succeeded in coming out of the crisis thanks to a huge public bailout, even stronger than they were before, and in a better position to lay the basis for the next crisis. But they don't care because they'll get bailed out again. I mean, that's class consciousness with a vengeance. In fact, the labor movement has occasionally recognized it. You may remember, I think it was around the late 70s, Doug Fraser, then the head of the UAW, criticized the auto industries kind of with astonishment, because he said, hey, you guys are fighting a bitter class war. I thought we were supposed to be cooperating. Oh, sure, big chance they'll cooperate. And sure, they were fighting a bitter class war, and the union leadership didn't want to see it for their own interests. And then, the healthcare is a good case. It's been discussed. I've discussed it, others have, but the healthcare, the United States and Canada have quite different histories with regard to healthcare, although they're very similar societies. And one reason for it, a main reason, is the union movements. In Canada, the union movements fought for healthcare for everyone. In the United States, the same unions fought for healthcare for themselves. So if you were in the UAW, you had a pretty decent healthcare system. But it was a compact with management. And that's a compact between collaborationist labor leaders and highly class-conscious management. And you know where that's going to lead. So if management says it's the end of the compact, it's the end of the compact. You don't have health care or anything else. Well, that's the difference between a socially conscious labor movement, more or less in Canada, I don't want to exaggerate, but more so than here, and an individualist-oriented labor movement says, I'm going to get something for myself. Sam Gompert's unionism, which the UAW followed.
Well, it's pretty much the same topic. It's about how businesses use their propaganda for, I would say now more so they use propaganda more so, for union busting, then they used like the violent tactic.
Well, now but I mean, for a while after the Second World War, when there was strong support for labor and there was rather radical society in many ways, this was done subtly. But since Reagan, it's just done openly. I mean, Reagan, I don't know if he had an idea in his head, but what we call Reagan, namely his administration, bitterly hated unions and wanted them destroyed. It began with the air controllers strike and went on from there. So during the Reagan years, the administration has told the business world they're not going to enforce the labor laws. And the number of illegal firings tripled during the Reagan years. You can read that in Business Week, which was pretty happy about it. And it's at that time that you start getting these companies that are specialize in how to destroy unions, and they're quite public. They don't make it secret, and they have all sorts of techniques for management to destroy unions. Well, when Clinton came along, it sort of moderated a little bit, but Clinton had a different device for breaking unions. It's called NAFTA. Because the government was entirely lawless, employers could exploit NAFTA to threaten union organizers with transfer. It's illegal, but when you've got a lawless government, it doesn't matter if it's illegal. I think the number of union drives blocked increased by about 50%, just using NAFTA as an illegal tactic to destroy unions. Actually, the study of this done under NAFTA auspices, part of the NAFTA legislation required studies of labor practices. And there's quite a good study that came out by this labor historian at Cornell, his name escapes me at the moment, on the use of NAFTA to undermine and destroy unions. Well, that was going on in the Clinton years. Then, of course, Bush. No need to talk about it. But starting with Reagan, it became quite open. The attack on unions. I mean, it wasn't Pinkerton's anymore, but it was just not applying the laws.
We're seeing that very much in the IWW, and especially with the Starbucks Workers Union to this day, where Starbucks will put out all kinds of anti-union propaganda, both internally within the company and externally. A lot of it is telling the workers they don't need a union.
They're better off without it.
Right.
There's the Whole Foods line and stuff.
Corporate social responsibility. And a lot of it is actually very effective. We found. And so one of my burning questions for you was how could we, as a small independent labor union, work to fight against that kind of propaganda?
You've got to get people organized and tell them the truth. There aren't any magic tricks to it. Sometimes it's pretty amazing. Actually, I think in that same article you mentioned, I mentioned one pretty striking case. That was the Caterpillar case. Caterpillar was quite important because that was the first manufacturing industry that used Reaganite strike-breaking techniques called in scabs, which happened to be illegal. It doesn't matter in a lawless state. Called in scabs to break a major strike. It was in the early 90s, I think, but there were reports of it, and it was reported pretty well in the Chicago Tribune. Very often the business press has much better labor reporting than anything else. And the Chicago Trib had good stories about it. I quoted some of them, and they pointed out something very interesting. They said that the workers got very little support in, I think it was Peoria, when scabs illegally broke the strike. And that was particularly striking because that whole community had been built up by the union. It was a union-based community, which they had, they created the community. It was the workforce. They'd won many rights. But when it came to the crunch, the community itself didn't support them. Now, that's kind of interesting about Obama, because Obama was a community organizer, supposedly, in Chicago at that time. I'm sure he read the Chicago Tribune, so he knew about it. But when he went to show his solidarity with the workforce, first place he went was Caterpillar. I don't think he's forgotten. And the labor movement didn't react. Even radical labor historians didn't remember. I remember talking to a couple of them, pointing it out, because it's been wiped out of consciousness. It's only 15 years after all. It's a real triumph of propaganda, in many ways. And yeah, it's a lot of work to reconstruct. It's happened before. In the 1920s, the labor movement was almost completely destroyed. Foreign visitors, even the right-wing British press was writing articles, I can't believe how workers are treated in the United States. And it looked as if, there's a book by David Montgomery, a very good labor historian. It's called The Rise and Fall of Labor or something. And the fall of labor that he's talking about is the 1920s. Well, the 1930s, it really revived and became pretty radical. Okay. Things can happen, but not by themselves. Then you had the Communist Party, and whatever you think about the Communist Party, nevertheless, they were right at the heart of civil rights activism, labor activism, and so on. And without that, something else has to provide it. You don't want to have their Russia worship, but domestically, they had a pretty good record. Can remember it pretty well from childhood. My family was what they were mostly. Union people.
Your father was in the IWW, correct?
Pardon?
Your father was in the IWW?
He was in the IWW, but if you want to know the truth, you want to know the truth?
Yes,
Okay, he came over as an immigrant, didn't know any English. Went to work in a sweatshop in Baltimore, and he told me later. He said he didn't really know English, but this guy was coming around, and he seemed to be for the workers, so he signed up. He was an IWW organizer. He didn't regret it. He just really didn't know what was going on.
What industry was he in?
Pardon?
What industry?
I don't even know if I ever knew, but some sweatshop in Baltimore. I knew with my other relatives, some of the women were garment workers union, men were shop boys and things like that.
And the women, were they based in New England?
Pardon?
Were they based in New England, or was that more towards
Well, this was New York.
New York.
I happened to be in Philadelphia, but the family was in New York.
Okay.
And I could see what the union was doing for them. It really saved their lives. I had two aunts, Spencer aunts, who were in the seamstresses, and of course unemployed in the 30s. But the union gave them a life. They had a couple of weeks in the country in a union installation. They had educational programs, all sorts of things. There was a life, a real community, and that. They were members of the Communist Party, but they didn't care one way or another about Russia. They just cared about the United States.
And on that note, I guess I'm also looking to sort of think ahead what's in the future for the labor movement and for the IWW, and not so much about what we can do, but what will realistically happen and how we'll all deal with that. One thing I'm thinking specifically of is what your opinion is of the Employee Free Choice Act.
I think it's dead, unfortunately. Unless there's a lot of force organized before it. Of course, Obama promised it before the election, but election promises don't mean anything. It gradually sank down on the agenda as he moved into office, and it wasn't surprising. Actually, Rahm, there was an interview with in the Wall Street Journal with Rahm Emanuel. I think it must have been right after the election, and the interviewer asked Emanuel, one of the questions he asked him is, well, what are you going to do with these kind of crazed radicals in the party like Barney Frank and others, real crazed? He said, well, don't worry, we're pragmatic, we'll control them, so I don't remember if he asked about EFCA, but he might have.
So I guess more generally, before I came here, I asked a number of wobblies and anarchists and my family. My mother's a linguist, so she had her own questions too. And I asked them what would they ask you if they had one question, and the most common response I got was if you had one piece of advice to offer future generations of say radicals and wobblies and revolutionaries and linguists and everyone, especially in light of the tough financial times that we're facing and will probably continue to face for a long time in the Western world now.
Well, yes. I get a lot of letters from people. When I go home tonight, I'll have 15 letters today from mostly young kids who don't like what's going on. They want to do something about it. And can I give them some advice as to what they should do? Or can I tell them what they should read or something? It doesn't work like that. I mean, everything depends very much on who you are, what your values are, what your commitments are, what circumstances you live in, what options you're willing to undertake. And that determines what you ought to be doing. I mean, there are some, I think, very general ideas that people can keep in mind. Like one of them is, they're kind of truisms. It's only worth mentioning them because they're always denied. First of all, don't believe anything you hear from power systems. So if Obama or the boss or the newspapers or anyone else tells you we're doing this, that, and the other thing, either dismiss it or assume the opposite is true, which often is. You have to rely on yourself, your associates. Gifts don't come from above. They're going to come, you're going to win them or you won't have them. And you win them by struggle, and that requires understanding and serious analysis of the options and the circumstances, and then you can do a lot. And so take right now, there is a right-wing populist uprising, the town hall meetings, the demonstrations and so on. That's very common, even on the left, to just ridicule them. Look at these lunatics talking about, Obama the socialist or the communist and the fascist and, death panels and all the rest of it. But that's not the right reaction. If you look at these people and you listen to them on talk radio, those are people with real grievances. I mean, I listen to talk radio a lot. It's kind of interesting. I mean, it's insane, but it's interesting. And if you can sort of suspend your knowledge of the world and just sort of try to enter into the world of the people who are calling in, you can understand them. I mean, I've never seen a study, but my sense of it is that these are people who feel really aggrieved. I've done everything right all my life. I'm a God-fearing Christian. I'm white. I'm male. I've worked hard. I carry a gun. I do everything I'm supposed to do. And I'm getting shafted. And in fact, they are getting shafted. For 30 years, their wages have stagnated or declined. Social conditions have worsened. The children going crazy. There's no schools. There's nothing. So somebody's doing something to me. Who is it? Well, Rush Limbaugh has answered. It's the rich liberals who own the banks and run the government and, of course, run the media, and they don't care about you. There's a name for them. You're the flyby people. You don't live in Boston, New York, and you're not in San Francisco where everything's run by gays. You're the other people, the kind of hard-working honest Americans. And they don't care about you, these guys who own the corporations and the banks. They just want to give everything away to illegal immigrants and, gays and communists and so on. And we got to defend ourselves against them. And everything they tell you is just a way to suppress you. Like they talk about this thing they made up called global warming because they want to take away your jobs. And they talk about health reform because they want to put a microchip in you and make sure the government runs you. And it goes on like that. Well, the reaction we should be having to them is not ridicule, but rather self-criticism. Why aren't we organizing? I mean, we're the ones who ought to be organizing, not Rush Limbaugh. And if they're caught up in this, well, it's our fault. And there are historical analogs, which are not exact, of course, but are close enough to be worrisome. This has a whiff of early Nazi Germany. Hitler was appealing to groups with similar grievances and giving them crazy answers. But at least they were answers. They weren't getting them from anywhere else. It's the Jews and the Bolsheviks, and we know what happened. In this case, they're not getting answers from anyone else. I mean, the liberal Democrats aren't going to tell them, yeah, you're being shafted because of the policies that we've established over the years that we're maintaining now. They're not going to, that's not going to be an answer. And they're not getting answers from the left. So, okay, there's an internal coherence and logic to what they get from Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, and the rest of these guys. And they sound very convincing, they're very self-confident, and they got an answer to everything, and a crazy answer most of the time, but it's an answer, and it hangs together. And that's our fault if that goes on. So there's one thing to be done is don't ridicule these people, join them, and talk about their real grievances and give them a sensible answer. Like, take over your factories.
Great. I think that's all we have time for.